Hello, my name's Jerome Starkey and I'm the defence editor of The Sun newspaper, and we're going to give you a quick update on what's been happening in Ukraine over the last week. There's been three main events of note. The first was an attack on the Kerch Bridge that links mainland Russia to Crimea. Two explosions cut the four-lane highway, making it inoperable. Russia has cancelled a grain deal under which Ukraine was allowed to export some of its grain to markets around the world, and it has threatened to sink any ships travelling to or from Ukraine because it says it will assume that they are carrying arms. And finally, the Wagner group mercenary leader Yevgeny Prigozhin appears to have appeared in a video coming from Belarus. His fighters have released a clip which they say shows him welcoming them to a camp in Belarus. Now that's significant because his whereabouts was unknown. Indeed, whether or not he was still alive was a source of some speculation. And most recently, last night, there have been yet more drone and missile attacks, most recently on the cities of Odessa and Mykolaiv, which have killed at least 2 people. So what does this mean? Well, firstly, the attack on the Kerch Bridge is hugely symbolic. This bridge, 12 miles long, built at a cost of about £2.7 billion, was one of Vladimir Putin's pet projects. After he annexed Crimea in 2014, he ordered the bridge to be built and he personally opened it by driving machinery across in 2018, and he boasted that he had succeeded to span the Kerch Strait where the Tsars, the Russian leaders and Stalin had failed. This is the second time it's been attacked. The last time was in October last year. That caused deep panic in Crimea, particularly among Russian holidaymakers who travel to the peninsula for their summer holidays on the Black Sea, because they suddenly feared that they were going to get trapped. When the bridge is cut, the only way back is either by ferry or through occupied Ukrainian territory above the Sea of Azov. But there's also a military implication, of course, because that bridge is used to get Russian material and military supplies from mainland Russia into Crimea and then up to Russian troops fighting on the southern front. This is part of a broader Ukrainian strategy to try and harass, disrupt and ultimately cut Russian supply lines. This is part of shaping the battlefield so that when they do encounter Russian troops in direct and close combat, those troops have been starved of food and ammunition and are suffering from low morale, which the Ukrainians hope will make those conflicts, which are pretty gritty and unpleasant conflicts, easier for them to win. The grain deal probably should be seen possibly as a consequence of that attack on Kerch Bridge. Russia said it was cancelling it almost immediately. That's Russian spite, and I think we can probably see the most recent attacks on Mykolaiv and Odessa in the same vein, part of a long-running Russian campaign of nightly missile and drone attacks. Last year we saw them targeting civilian infrastructure. Now Russia appears to have tried to change its focus. They've been hitting depots, including Red Cross food depots, but trying to hit what they believe are Ukraine's military supply and command node. The appearance of Yevgeny Prigozhin, now this is unconfirmed. It's a grainy video shot in low light, but Wagner is saying that he's in Belarus. Significant because they appear to be showing him still at large. Significant because in the recording he appears to be saying that the Russian military operation in Ukraine is a disgrace.
Очень много. Сейчас то, что происходит на фронте, это позор, в котором нам не нужно участвовать.
Interestingly, it comes the same day, it was released the same day that the boss of Britain's secret intelligence service, sometimes better known as MI6, Sir Richard Moore, said it was his belief that Yevgeny Prigozhin was still, in his words, floating around. We understood Prigozhin, who had, of course, remember, this is the man who led an armed mutiny against Vladimir Putin towards the end of last month. His fighters came out of Ukraine into Russia and charged up the road towards Moscow, coming within about 125 kilometers. Vladimir Putin forced to cut what the MI6 chief called a humiliating deal to save his own skin. And even for Sir Richard Moore, he said it was bewildering the speed with which Prigozhin went from being a traitor at breakfast when Putin came out and made a sort of panicked and emergency address to the nation, He'd been pardoned by supper time. And then a few days later, we understood Prigozhin had actually been invited into the Kremlin for tea. He's reappeared, it would seem, in Belarus. He's back on the scene, but exactly how powerful he remains, who he commands, and what is happening to his Wagner Group mercenaries still remains something of a mystery. Interestingly, I was lucky enough to be in Prague when Sir Richard Moore was delivering only his second public address since he took charge of Britain's secret intelligence service. And one of his key messages was that Russians who are appalled by what is happening in their name in Ukraine are flocking to spy for his intelligence service. He said many have already come, and he invited more to follow suit.
I invite them to do what others have already done this past 18 months and join hands with us. Our door is always open. We will handle their offers of help with the discretion and professionalism for which my service is famed. Their secrets will always be safe with us. And together we will work to bring the bloodshed to an end.
That should be seen in the wider context of what he called deep fractures in the political elite around President Putin. Sir Richard said there was chaos and carnage seeping back into Russia, back into Moscow from the battlefield in Ukraine. And the suggestion was that Vladimir Putin's position is becoming increasingly unstable, and Sir Richard's message was the only way to stop that instability was for him to withdraw his troops from Ukraine. So what to expect next? Well, I think the grinding counter-offensive and attritional conflict will continue. We know Ukraine is trying to shape the battlefield, trying to cut supply lines. We understand one of their main objectives is to push south from central Zaporizhia towards the Sea of Azov, because having cut the Kerch Bridge, they now want to cut what is known as the land bridge, which is effectively a route that stretches from Rostov in Russia through occupied Mariupol across the Sea of Azov to the top of Crimea. That is their land bridge route to supply their troops on the southern front. Also worth noting, in Bakhmut, the town that for many, many months was the epicenter of the war, sometimes referred to as the meat grinder because of the tens of thousands of soldiers who were killed and wounded there, the commander of Ukraine's land forces, General Alexander Syrsky, has said that he believes his soldiers are now in a position to retake it. That town was captured by Yevgeny Prigozhin's Wagner mercenaries, supported by Russian soldiers, after months and months and months of incredibly bloody close quarters fighting. Syrsky insists that the time may soon be upon us when his forces can recapture it. A couple of other interesting nuggets worth sharing, I think. This week, the British government revealed the existence of a previously secret warehouse at its research facility at Porton Down in Wiltshire, where it said it has a collection of captured Russian vehicles and captured Russian communication systems which have come from the battlefield in Ukraine, which its scientists are now forensically disassembling, dissecting and studying in order to understand how better to defeat them. This will be the first in what we hope is a regular weekly series of updates on the situation in Ukraine. If you've got any specific questions or topics that you'd like us to cover, then please ask them in the comments and we'll do our best to answer them next time.